All right, we're back. It's COMP397, Web Game Programming. It's fall 2015, and it's week 3, lesson 3, part 3, and we're still going on our state machine. Last video, we just talked about creating a template from Visual Studio, so we're just preparing, and now we're going to finally get into it. So what do? So here I am in Visual Studio, and I've got my script file up, and if you notice, I've got some typings, my objects, and so on. Let's add a couple things we were missing from the last time, right? So I'm going to go into my core files, go into my game.ts file here. And if you notice, I'm just going to unpin this one so you guys can see this clearly. If you notice, I included up here, my stats counter, right? But I haven't really included it in actually implemented it yet, right? So there's a couple things to do to implement my stats counter. And it's part of my global game framework variables that I'm going to add in. So let's talk about this as var stats then is of type, if I did it right, stats with capital S. Now if you're using the same framework with me, if you've just gone forward with your from lesson 2 to lesson 3, this is what we're doing, then stats is something that you're going to have, right? That's the first piece. And the next piece that you want to have in here is we need to create some kind of function that sets up the stats. Sets up our game stats, right? So that's the next function, and we're going to kind of put that into play just underneath our game loop. So here's our game loop. Right now it's pretty empty, right? And underneath our game loop, we're going to put up a new function. So this is like set up game stats, right? And this is our game stats we can turn off or on later on. Okay, for now, we're going to make it so it's always on. So I'm going to say function, and we're going to call it setup stats, right? That's what our function is going to be called. And our setup stats function is going to use the stats object we just created. So stats, of course, is equal to what? Equals to new stats. So we're going to kind of say it's a new stats object, right? That's the first thing we need to do. We're also going to do something like this. We're going to say stats.setMode 0, which actually shows up our frames per second. So shows frames per second. That's what that thing does. Next is stats dot, and here's something weird too, DOM element, right? Because we're going to make it a DOM element style. Here's something we're going to do. Style dot position, right, is equal to absolute positioning. So you can do the same thing with any one of your elements here, and it's just JavaScript that we're using, right? And then stats. Bring it up for you so you can see if I'm sorry. I'm a little bit. How's that? Is that better?
Thanks.
Stats.DOM element, right? And then style dot right. So remember, we're going to say the right, just like we do in CSS. The right is going to be 0 pixels to the right. Let's start like this. And stats.DOM elements dot style dot left, right? Oh, sorry, top. I'll be okay. It's equal to 0 pixels. So what does it say? It says go 0 pixels from the right and 0 pixels from the top. So it's going to be right. That's where it's going to be positioned physically, the actual stats counter. And then we're going to say is document.body append child stats.DOM element. And don't worry about what this does, but what it's really doing is add. This is like a document. This is a stage.addChild equivalent, but it's adding it to the document, the index.html document. That's what it's doing with JavaScript. Okay. Now this won't fire yet. This isn't going to be launched until I start off my stats, right? So my stats has to be kind of kicked off somewhere, and typically what we want to do is we want to do it either in the init function. Right, so we want to kind of start off our stats in the init function, and this is typically what we want to do is right after our when we set up the game. So when we set up our game itself, we want to set up our stats function so that it's instantiated. So we kind of call our stats function for the very first time, right? Otherwise, it'll never work. Like we can't expect the stats function to work until we've set up our stage and we set up our canvas, or all that kind of stuff, right? So we're going to do that pretty much right before we call our main. We're going to call up setup stats. So we can't do that without that. So setup stats. That's going to be a public function, right? This actually sets up our stat counting. Stats counting. Right now, but we also have to measure. So what we're going to do is we're going to start counting inside of our game loop. So when the game loop starts, right, we're going to call the game loop. So let's try this out. Watch. It's going to be like this. Stats.begin, right? That's what we're going to have to say. So stats.begin. Then afterwards, when we finish, this is where we're measuring, right? Like we do any kind of stats measuring or whatever, stats.end, right? So we're calling the end function. So what this does is it says, so start counting, right? Start counting, and then stop counting. So every frame, it's going to start and stop the stats counter to give us an accurate picture of our frame rate. Okay? Make sense? Let's see it in action. Right? So I'm going to run this thing, and if I've done everything correctly, we're going to have our stats counter kind of firing in the corner now, right? And if it doesn't show up, don't worry about it. We just refresh the screen. Sometimes we need to do that, and there it is. Right now, if you notice on the right-hand side, you see this little graph, and it's showing 58 frames per second for me. You might show you a different number, right? Well, what this is doing is it's kind of counting off. We're kind of into setup, but this is good because it kind of shows us how our machine, our physical machine, is responding to what we've drawn out here, right? We don't want this to fall much below 60 frames per second. If it is, something's wrong. We've done something wrong, right? That's what we want to try. So we want to kind of keep it around, again, the 60 frames per second rate. Now, for me, I'm a little bit lower because I'm running it in a virtual machine, right? So you might see a different number later on. What are you guys seeing? You guys seeing 58 or 59? That should be about right, okay? So that's the level that we're talking about here. Now, this is okay for us right now, but what happens, if you notice, what happens when this thing kind of flows this way? If I kind of close it up, it still stays to the right, right? And some people may like this up here. If you want to move it to the bottom right, you can just change the values. I'm going to show you where that is. You can change these values. We just set up stats, right? So you can say where it says style.right 0, style.top 0, so it's the top right corner of the screen, right? You can make it so it's style.left 0 to the left of the screen, right? And if I did that, just change right to left, just from a positioning perspective. Again, it's just like doing CSS. If you guys know CSS, this is just absolute positioning to the left, right? And if I rerun this thing, then what it's going to do is it's going to bring up my stats counter to the left, right? So it's the same thing. It's just it's bringing it up to the left or the right. Okay, depending on where you like it, you could certainly adjust it as you see fit. Okay, I'm going to leave it where right now to the left. Yeah. Okay, so here that's a good question. So let's go back there. And you're saying if I click on it, what happens? Well, this is milliseconds response time, right? So right now it's 0 milliseconds in latency, right? But that's not what we want to see. We don't want to see this view. We want to see this view. So not this one. We want to see this one, sorry, which is our frames per second. That's the one we want. That's our 0 state, or mode 0 starting off. That's our default mode. That's the one we really care about. The other ones, not so much, right? But it does measure from the time our update starts and update finishes. So all we're doing is adding two things: hello world and goodbye, right? So we're not doing much. There's not much of an update going on right now. We don't have a lot of things, but there's no motion on the screen or anything like that. Okay, so what if I want to create, like I said before, some kind of state machine where I have multiple screens? I want to have a start screen, and I want to have a kind of a play screen with a button to get there, and then some kind of and game over screen with a button to go back to play again, right? So those are the kind of things we need to get going. How do we code that? That's what I want to kind of code out with you. Let's see how we can do this. So two things. First of all, now that we have our stats, and this is good, it'll tell us if we're doing things in the correct way. We have our hello goodbye label, and this is good, but this isn't really going to do what we want it to do, because our main function, that can't be our main function anymore. Our game has to physically live in its own module, okay? Our own module. So we have to do some prep work to get this going, right? And we're going to add to this as we go, like I said. So right now we have this label. This is good. But for now, let's just get rid of this. Actually, let's get rid of the goodbye label for now, please, right? And change our hello label to like game start. So we know we can kind of say this is our game start, okay? We don't worry about what actually is printing in there. That's the most important piece, our game start. And there is nothing else that goes on with our game start right now, right? We don't have any kind of button. We don't have anything. We need a button. We need some kind of button to propel us from, you know, step 1 to step 2. We need to create a button, all right? Now, we could create a next button, right, and a back button. So next button and a back button to get us to the next screen and go back, right? I'm just trying to format this thing for you guys to use for your assignment, okay? Or a left button and a right button, all right? Let's just call it that way. So we can create some simple buttons, all right? How would we do this? Your favorite graphic program would do, okay? Let's try this out. So first of all, let's get the graphics in play. We need to get that in play. We need to get all this in play before we start building out our state machine. Because if we don't have these things, we can't play with them, right? So I'm just going to go into Fireworks here. So I'm going to launch Fireworks. Now you can choose whatever. Once I've done, I'll put these up on GitHub. So when I make them, you can watch. When I make them, you don't have to do it with me. I'll put them up on GitHub, and then you have all my buttons. You have my new assets. Okay. So let's do that. So I'm going to go to GitHub, and I'm going to go to Design, and we'll choose Fireworks, and I'll make a couple of buttons. I can't make them too big, and I can't make them too small. I know that roughly something like at least, I don't know, 100 pixels, let's say, by about, you know, let's say 30 pixels might be the right size, 100 by 30, something like that, right? And we can actually see a real size view of what it's going to look like. So first of all, I don't have a sheet in Fireworks. Fireworks is my kind of application of choice. Too bad Adobe's killing it, and they don't have it in CC. If you notice, it's CS6. You can use other applications like Illustrator now to do almost the same stuff. They've kind of incorporated some of that in there. So we don't want to make a width and a height of 640 by 480. We want to make a button, which is going to be something, like I said, about 100 wide by about, like I said, about, let's say 50 tall. Let's see what that looks like. We're going to make our background, our canvas color transparent. So we're going to use the transparency. We're going to make it a ping image, right? And we're going to put it in the background. Let's see what that looks like, how big it is. Okay, that's pretty small, right? That's not quite exactly what I want. I think we need to make it a little, I think the size, the width is good, right? But I think the button has to be a little bit larger than that. We'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So let's say change my my canvas size. And right now, instead of 100, my anchor is going to be in the middle. I'm going to make it's going to grow all ways. I'm going to make my, I'll make it from the left here. I'll make my canvas size 150, let's say, by 50. There we go. So it's a little bit better. I think that's probably the right size for a button. Now this is actual size. This is 100%. So we're seeing what it would actually look like on the screen, right? This is pretty good. So now we need some kind of background image, and we can make it square. We can make it oval or something. Just to make it interesting, let's make it an oval image, right? And what I'm going to do is, I know I'm going to draw there, so I'm going to kind of zoom in. So the button is just going to be blown up a little bit. So make it an oval image, and I'm going to make that button that looks like this. You can make whatever size or kind of button you like. I'm going to kind of make sure that it's within my bounds of my image, right? And I'm obviously not going to make it black because I think that's an ugly color, although that could work if you like a black and white kind of theme, right? I'm going to make it some kind of off color of a different color, like blue. I like kind of a lighter blue color, right? Like that. That's when all my buttons are going to be blue, like this. Okay, there's my button. Okay, now that's my background, and what I want to do is create some labels for my button. So I'm going to use a kind of a font that's really big, 90. Let's go back from a 90 to a 30 font. That might be too big too. Okay, let's go to 26, and let's say we'll make a button that says start. Okay, so that's our start button. All right, and if you want to make it so that it is instead of black text, you want to make it white text. We'll change this to white to make it more interesting. Right there, it is a start button, right? And it's kind of a a normal looking, not really anything fancy, just an image with an oval, right? And nothing too crazy. Start. All right, so let's do the same thing now. Let's save this thing as an image we're going to use. I'm going to say File, and I'm going to save as. I'm going to kind of create a repository for this in a second. We need some place on the desktop or somewhere where we can have our assets. So I'm going to create a new folder for us, and we're going to call this thing State Machine, just so we can add the assets in our State Machine, right? And I'm going to make us just leave the assets in there. I'm going to call this the Start button, right? Start button. Okay, there we are, and add it in. Okay, so there's a Start button. Let's change this all the other buttons we need. I'm just going to change my text and just save it as something else. Okay, so here's I'm going to change my text. Now these actually become, instead of this, it actually becomes a ping image. I'm putting together. I make my font is being rasterized into a ping image, so it can't be modified. All right. Now it's an Adobe Fireworks ping. So if I have Adobe Fireworks and I open it up, I can actually modify it later. But for now, for our purposes, it will just look like a static image. So here's our start. We'll go to next. That'll be the next button. And make sure that the next button is, the text is centered. I'm just going to move it into the center. There it is. So I'm just going to recenter that stuff. File, save as, and we're going to call this our next button. Next button. And we'll do back button, because those are the buttons we need for our UI, right? So here's our back button. Oh, back. Okay, so next and back. You could probably add arrows if you want to. For now, I think this is good. So next and back. We're not going to make an end. We're going to make a start button and a next and back. All right, so we can go back and forth. Okay, that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's just file, save as. For our example, this is all we need. So this is our back button. Okay, we're creating our UI, right? So there's, remember, in CreateJS, there is no UI. You create everything on your own. Every element you want, every button, every slider, everything you want to make, you make from scratch. We're going to actually do the same thing in Java, right? For a lot of us, we can do a lot of the same kind of thing in Java, except Java has some built-in styles. We can also make our own. Okay, so there's our back button. And now we need to incorporate these things I've just created. We need to incorporate them. Here's our state machine, right, into our code somehow. So I'm going to take this, and we need to drag these buttons here, or copy them into the whole folder. Let's say, here's my state machine folder. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to move it over here into my Windows machine. This is a little bit of a trick, right? We have to do. Let's see if we can do this. Paste. There it is. Our state machine buttons. And what I want to do is in my Visual Studio, I'm going to stop debugging. I go to my Solution Explorer, right? And in my assets now, I have some images, an image directory that I'm going to take my buttons for it. I'm going to kind of, this is pinned up, right? So I'm going to kind of go back into my, oops, that's okay. Here's my desktop, and here's my state machine buttons. This is how simple they are, right? My next button, my start button, and so on. And just, that's weird that it's black. It's showing up as black. I wonder why that is. I'm going to have to check that out in a bit. But let's just take these three buttons and drag and drop them into my images folder. Right? There we go. So there's my back button, my next button, and my start button. They're all here, right? And they're in my images. Now I got to incorporate these buttons. I got to load them into my files somehow. I got to be able to use these buttons as images. Okay. So we've got to do something different that we haven't done before in order for us to do that. Okay, so a couple things to do, right? One is, can we add a start button into our main? And before I do that, I'm going to go to Team Explorer, and I'm going to go to Home, and I'm going to go to Changes, and I'm going to say Added button images to project, so you can have them. Okay, so that way you have the same button images that I have. I'm just going to track all my changes, and I'm going to commit. And I'm also going to push everything that I've done and unsync commits. I'm going to sync. And now, if you go up on my GitHub into lesson 3, right, you should see all the buttons. You can download them now. So I would go ahead and do that so we're all on the same page, guys. All right, it's kind of important that we do that. And let me know when you guys are ready, right? Because the next step is, let's create a button, and then let's make a button class. And then now that we have a button class, finally we'll be able to start in our state machine, because we can't do it until we've actually done a couple of things. We need a couple of pieces to test with, right? And by the way, I'm helping you because if you ever decide to do the CreateJS method instead of using ImpressJS, like I showed you earlier for your assignment number 1, I'm giving you some assets to get you going, or ideas of how to get assets. By the way, you can also find button assets online, an X button, a previous button, a back button or whatever. You can find them all up online. Icons would also work as well. All kinds of stuff instead of you having to download and install this. But I'm doing this so that way you guys are ready to go. Okay, so you got the buttons yet? Everybody? You got the buttons? Okay, good. Let's continue. So that's the one piece. So one thing is I want to add in, just like I did for my label, I want to add in a kind of an item in here. Now there's a couple things to do. Let's add in a global game variable. I got my hello label. I also have my goodbye label. Let's get rid of my goodbye label. And we'll create a new one called my start button. So here's my start button. And it's going to be of type CreateJS.bitmap. Okay, so that's the first thing. So CreateJS.bitmap. All I'm doing is making a reference to the class bitmap. I haven't instantiated it yet, right? Just like we normally do. And by the way, I can probably get rid of this game started thing now because I know that my game is working, right? All right, so that's cool. I've got my bitmap, and what I want to do here is do a couple things, right? I want to establish my button down here. I don't have a class for my button. I will be making one though. But for now, as a preview, let's add in a button underneath my label. So how do I do this? I got to call it my start button. Here's my start button, right? And that's equal to, right, a new start button, or CreateJS bitmap, right? And in there, what is it looking for? It's looking for an image URL as an example, or something like that. So there's a couple things you can do. I can directly put in the URL for my image. And that's what it's looking for, my image or URL, right? So some kind of path to my image or string to the image, right? So let's do that. Let's see if that would work. So we know that the direct path, or my direct link is, and if I looked at my Solution Explorer for a second, it's under. I'm teleporting myself from this, and what I want to do is I want to access my start button. So the nice way to do it is just to drag and drop and see what happens. What do I get if I can do kind of a drag and drop? And the problem is I cannot, right, because of the way I am in my my class. So I know I need to go up a step to go to scripts. So it's ... to go to scripts. I need to go one more ... one more step up in my hierarchy to go out to my root, right? So ... /... like this. And then I want to go into my assets, right? .images, right? So here's my images. If this is right, and then I want to access my next start button. .paint. Okay, so that's the path to my button. Okay, now if you notice it didn't error out because I'm just telling it where to get my button. Okay, it's going to be a problem with this, by the way, just FYI. All right, we're going to talk about this in a second. All right, so now I want to just for starters, let's just add my button to the stage. I'm going to say stage.addChild start button. If I've done things correctly, and that's all I would really need as a basics, kind of thing, I can run this thing and it should appear if I've kind of targeted it properly. It should appear in the top left corner, right? There it is. So that's good. So I've shown where my start button is. I've hard coded it. That's bad, right? And I'm doing a page load. I've actually loaded it, that bitmap into my page. I haven't preloaded it. We're going to talk about that preloading thing that I kind of already did with you once. We're going to get back to that later on. When we hone up we'll talk about preloading next week. We'll kind of fix up our file. We'll go from lesson 3 to lesson 4 and fix up our file and we'll do a preloader next week and I'll add some other things, right? But for now, there's our start button. Our start button is here. Now it's a button, right? But it doesn't act like a button. It just acts like a bitmap right now. Okay, so let's just stop this, go back. We'll leave it like this for now. And if you notice up here, I've got a couple of things I need to do, right? I need to make it accessible here in my update, right? In order for me to move things along. And now that I've got my button and it's a bitmap, I can make any bitmap clickable. How do I do that? I need to add an event listener, right? I'm creating a button like this, right? Watch, here we go. So I'm going to say something like this. Start button then, on, That's my event listener, right? On what? On click, right? On click, I want it to do something. I want to go to, kind of a click start button event, click start button method, right? Which I don't have yet. Click start button. I don't have that method yet. That's what I want it to do. That's on click. That's what it's doing. That's why when you see this, the way it's written, start button on, think about it as on click. That's what I'm doing. Then go to this function, which I haven't written yet, and do this function. Okay. And by the way, pass a reference to this, which is my context. Sometimes I need that. Okay, cool. Well, I don't have my click start. Let's make it up here. So here's my click start button. I'm going to make, so this is my callback function. Callback function. Call the callback function or some kind of handler or / event handler, right? For button clicks, start button click, start button click. That's what it is, right? And that's what it's going to be called. It's going to be called function then, click start button, and we're going to make it so that it takes a type of mouse event, right? So we're going to say event then of type mouse event, so CreateJS.mouse event, right? And it's going to return void, which we forgot to do with our. We're trying to make a good. We're going to try and be good citizens, right? And return void for all of our methods that don't do anything, that don't return anything. All right, so there it is. So our start button then returns void, right? But we want to make it do something. So when we click the start button, I want to change the text of my hello label to say clicked. Make sense? All right, so let's do that. So we'll say hello label, right? Dot text, right? Is equal to clicked. Now it's going to mess up our text because our text is set up to start in the middle, right? Because of where it is, right? We can't. I've added it to stage, right? And so it's going to mess up. It's going to mess up the centering of our label when we click on it. Just because clicked is not the same size as game start. FYI, right? So that's what's going to happen. So hello label is going to change to clicked. Okay. Now when we do an event listener, this runs next to. All right, it's an event loop. The event loops happen next to our game loop. It's almost like another thread that's going on at the same time. Okay, it's not happening in line with our frame rate necessarily. Okay, so we can do as many clicks as we want, right, based on our this other event loop. And the event loop we kind of mentioned that up here. By the way, it's heavy in terms of interactivity. Notice up here, right, as an example, we haven't added this functionality in, right? So we kind of have to add this, we have to, add in the ability for us to click a button. And that's one thing that we're missing when it comes to the way we set up our screen. So if you notice here, stage, right, we have to make a change here to our init function. We have to go stage enable mouse over, right? And it's going to take a frequency. We don't want to put a frequency too much higher than 20. That's like 20 frames per second. We're listening 20 frames per second for any kind of mouse over events or anything like that, right? So enable, that's what enable mouse events, right? That's what it is, enable mouse events. If we don't do these, this thing, we won't see any kind of mouse over events that we're going to build in and all that stuff. We need to enable this. The problem with this is once we've enabled it for our scene or our state, if you will, it's enabled. And we can disable it, but we have to be careful on how to do this, okay? All right, so let's check this out. So I haven't repositioned it yet. Let's just refresh. We should be able to see the same, the bitmap in the same place. I'm going to refresh, right? And kill some of these. And when I click my start button, this should change the text to something else if I did it right. So click. See that? So now it's a button. I moved from being bitmap. Let me just refresh. Watch. Click. It's click. You should get that too. Do you get that? No? Yes? Okay. How about you in the corner, Steven? You got it? All right. Now that's why I'm going to share it with you. Once I do this, I'm going to update GitHub, and you'll get my code so you can see what I did. All right. All right, so let's take a look. So again, we're talking about buttons here. So there's my start button. I'm making my bitmap. I've got my start button done on click, then do this. That's what it's saying. And all I'm taking is my hello label, which is the one that says game start right now, to clicked. That's what we're going to do right now. Okay. For now, this is good. Let's add another event, a couple of other events for this thing, right? I also want to do start button. Follow me here. Dot on, but instead of clicked, I want to do mouse over, right? My mouse over event. And what I want to do is I want to select my listener, and it's going to be called mouse over start button, or over, I will call over start button. We did that kind of click start button, we'll do an over start button. How about that? And we'll pass in reference to this framework. And we know what, might as well, since we're starting off with all of our event listeners, we're registering, these are registering our event listeners. That's what we're doing. We're binding them to the event loop. Okay, that's what we're doing. So I'm going to kind of copy this. Here, I'll put it up here so you can see it. And we're going to paste another one. Instead of mouse over, we're going to make this called mouse out. Now, where did I get these? Where do I get these little strings? Where am I getting them from? They're actually enumerations. They're part of, they've been already defined in the CreateJS library. So when I say these are events that have been defined, and they also mirror what's part of a regular DOM document object model kind of mouse event. That's what they actually exist in the DOM. They've just been recreated for CreateJS. They've taken the DOM events and they've made them into their own. Okay. So I have a couple more events I want to choose. I want to have a mouse over and a mouse out. Well, here's my my button click event. Let's use the same kind of thing. So the first thing is I'll hand bomb this one, right? So this is a event handler. That's what it is, event handler for mouse over, right? And it's a function which is of, so it's called an over, when we're over the start button, right? It's an event of type CreateJS mouse event. That's the event type. And the whole method is returning void, nothing, right? Because it's not going to have a return type. But this time we're going to say this. We're going to say, when we mouse over our start button, we're going to say that our start button dot opacity. Well, I think it's alpha. Alpha, here it is. Alpha, when we mouse over it, it's going to go to 0.7. Okay. When we mouse over our start button, it's going to go to 0.7 alpha. Okay. We'll save this one. Okay. Now we're going to copy this whole function here. Just bear with me. And we're going to do our out. So mouse out. I think we called it out start button. What did I call it? Did I call it? Or over? Oh, I called it twice. We're going to call this out start button. When we're out of the start button, right? Away from the start button. This is for mouse out, right? And this is for, one is for mouse out, one is for mouse over. We're going to go back to an alpha of 1, or a solid shape again. So when we leave our start button, that's going to fire another event when we kind of hover away from it, and it's going to make our start button solid again. Okay, so it's kind of a cheap way of kind of giving a rollover effect for the button. We can also, by the way, swap out the image and call up, make the image change for the start button. So there's we've already pre-coded an image that makes it so it looks like a rollover image. Okay. But for now, let's keep it simple. By the way, this is keeping it simple. All right, let's run it and see what happens now. So if I refresh, right, as an example, and if I refresh this as well, because it's important to try and make sure our code refresh. If I hover over now, I get this some feedback. Take a look, guys. I'm getting feedback now when I roll over, so it looks like a button, right? Looks like a button when I roll over. You should get the same thing, right? So now when I click onto it, it gives me a click event, and when I roll over and roll out, it gives me this, you know, this effect that makes it look like a button to me. Okay, very simple way of doing buttons. Okay, cool. This is cool, but what if I have like 10 buttons, man? This can't be the way. This is going to drive me batty for me to listen for some kind of event listener or whatever over and over again. I'm going to have to make like a mouse over and a mouse out for a next button, a back button. I'm going to have like, maybe if I have 20 buttons, what if I make a UI that's really complex? So that harkens to the fact that, you know what, hey, Tom, you need another class. It's going to be a button class. So let's do that. First, I'm going to update GitHub with what I have for you people that weren't able to follow as fast as me. So I'm just going to go over here. And if you got yours going, great. But if you don't have your thing going, it's okay. I'm going to say added button to stage. And we're going to make a commit. We're going to go home, and we're going to go unsync commits, and we're going to sync, and then now you can compare your code with my code. It's up there, okay? All right, so you know my button works. The other thing is that my positioning is messed, eh? My positioning is way to the left. I want to kind of put it to the middle, and I can do kind of the same thing that I did with my hello label. So let's code that first before I make my class, okay? So what do I want to do? I want to say this. I want to say start button then, with my start button dot regex, my registration value again, because I want to go from the middle, right, not the top left, like I'm doing right now, is equal to start button. This is what you were trying to do, I think, Steve, in some ways, right? It's just a bitmap. Start button dot get bounds, right? Dot width times 0.5. So the middle of the x value, right? And then the same thing goes with start button. It's very similar to what we did with our label, in fact. Dot reg y, right? Here's our reg y is equal to, our buttons are going to start in the middle. Our start button dot get bounds dot height times 0.5. So I'll bring it up so you guys can see it. There you go. How's that? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going fast. And then the next one is I want to set my x and y coordinates. I know my x and y coordinates are 320 and 240 for my label, 320 being in the middle of the screen. I need to match that for my button. So I'm going to go, my button's going to be underneath my label, so it's going to be start button then dot x, right, is equal to 320, and start button, if I can just, start button dot y is equal to, we'll make it 340, all right, just to see if it's down there. And if that doesn't work, we'll move it up. Okay, so we've got our reg x and reg y, just like we did before, and our x and y values of where we want our button to be. Okay, so now let's run this thing and see what happens. So run it, and now we should see our button where we want it. Let's make just a refresh of the screen here. And hey, where did our button go? Huh? Huh? But I'm just telling you, this is how it goes, right? So how come I've done this, and then I added it to stage, and it was there for a second, and now she be gone? How come my regx and reg y values are gone, and how come my width and height are gone? Let's look and see what happens. There's a couple of things to look at here, and I got to tell you this because, unfortunately for me, you know, and this is what happens. Now, what if I took these things, Control X, and I put them down here? Before we make our button, we want to put all our event listers after we position everything and before we add it to stage. All right. Let's change the order a little bit and refresh, because I think sometimes you may see that there might be a difference. Sometimes. No, we don't. We're like, hey, where's our button? It went away, right? It was there for a second, and now she'd be gone. One thing to do is kind of go to inspect element, right, and click console. See what it says. It says, uncaught type error cannot read property width of null, right? Well, because it's trying to measure, right? It's trying to measure this, right? Our start button width. We don't know what our start button width is, because start button.regx, we haven't passed in a very complex value. We've just passed in a path to the image, and that's what the problem is. It's actually showing us, which is kind of really, really neat, exactly inside of our TypeScript file where the issue is. There's no error here, right? It's because we're trying to get the width, get bounds the width of the button, right? Now, the easiest thing to know, instead of doing a get bounds and all that kind of stuff, is to understand the width and the height of the buttons. And if I just double click on my start button to hand bomb it, right? So if I was to going to be one of these, you notice my width and height are 150 by 50. Remember we set our canvas to 150 by 50. So now we know what the buttons are, right? And if that's the case, if our regx and reg y values are 150 and 50, then 150 divided by 2 is 75. So we don't have to do any of this. Wait for a second. Now we're going to change this later on, okay? And instead of 50, our reg y is going to be 25, because we know the size of our image right now. Our image is 75 and 25, right? Let's see if that works. All right, so we change this, and we're doing this not in Visual Studio. We're doing this right in our browser. And let's see what happens if I refresh. Does that actually change anything? Well, guess what? I can't refresh because, and normally you can, by the way. If you're actually playing a game, you can actually modify the values on the fly, and it'll come up. It'll actually change. This is the way to cheat. with HTML5 games, right? If you can access the JavaScript code, you can totally change the score, do all kinds of stuff, right? But what we need to do is actually go back to the JavaScript code here and change this to 75 and 25. So let's just change this in there. Now this is not correct. I'll talk about this in a second. Here's 75 and 25. Right? So 75 and 25. And let us see what happens now, right? So when we refresh our screen, right? Here's our button, right? We told it how big it is, 75 and 25, right? And now we have our hover effect, right? And if I click this, it becomes clicked. It's not even, and I can move that around. I can redraw it if I want to, but there's a bit of code to do that, right? So I can't click it again. I can't click it, and it won't toggle back to clicked and unclicked, right? But now our button works. So we know this is some of what we have to do. Our regex and reg-y values have to change. So that's part of it. The other piece is when we load we can actually use our preloader like we talked about last week to preload our images, and we can do that not as sprite sheets. We're going to get the sprite sheets because we have a bunch of images. We're going to get a bunch of images pretty soon. We've got, just like we showed you guys in COMP305 with all of we have an island and ocean game. We have a kind of a shooter game, but we have all these images that we're going to have to preload eventually. Right now, I've just got this one image, right? And we have no idea how big this image is, this bitmap. We're just rendering it as we're dropping it in. We have no clue how big this image is. It doesn't come loaded with a width and a height, right? How about if I do a get measured width and get measured height? Can I do that? That's another function we can use. So instead of hard coding it like this, let's go start button then, right, dot get measured. Okay, I don't have access to that function even, right? I can do a get bounds, right? But I can't do a get measured height and get measured width. It won't allow me to. That's only for text. And the reason why is because we want to be able to measure the size of our bitmap. We don't know what the size of our bitmap is. Okay, we just don't know. So I want to undo this. Now this is going to be a problem if we use any other buttons other than the ones we have, right? And the reason for this is because we're not preloading. Once we preload, that information gets transferred, width and height gets transferred as an object into the bitmap class. And then we have that width and height gets transferred, so we can do a get bounds, right? Which is more accurate than putting in a size, right? But for now, this is okay. So let's do an interim button class, and we'll change the button class later on when we update our preloader and all that kind of stuff, okay? So we need regex and reg-y. Right now, they're going to be 75 and 25. And then our x and y values, we need to take that in here, plus a string of a path for the button itself, okay? We also know that we're going to go up and we're going to say assets images. I don't want to always listen for assets images as our path. I want to build my path automatically, as opposed to go in here and kind of put this in over and over again. I just want to put in start button. And I don't even want to put my ping. I want to put my ping image so it adds in my class, adds that in there too. I just want to put in their start button, and that's all I want to put in, and it'll find it for me, okay? So how would I do this? Well, let's go back and do it. So I'm going to go stop debugging. I'm going to go to Solution Explorer. I'm going to pin this back up. I'm going to minimize some of these so we can get back in here. And inside of our objects, I want to create a new TypeScript file. So let's do this for the first time. Here's my new TypeScript file. And we're going to call this thing button. Okay. Now button is going to be a new module. It's going to be the same module as objects, because notice they're inside the objects folder. So I might as well put it in the same module. So we'll say module, objects, same module as the other one, right? All we're doing is adding to the module, but just partitioning it into a different file, all right? And then we're going to say export. We need to put that export class button with a B extends CreateJS.bitmap. Okay, I'm going to just unpin this for a second so you can see it all. All right, cool. And put that in there. So what that does when I save, remember we did them when we see the TypeScript, it looks like this. Those few lines look like this much script. Whoop. It creates a self-executing, anonymous closure, right? That's what this does. It basically creates a namespace, and we also use prototypical inheritance to create a constructor that we can use later on. Okay, so instead of doing all that work, we can just use these two lines to do all that. That's why the beauty of TypeScript is, right? So let's get in there now to use a constructor. So we need to do, let's notice we're going to call it a constructor for our button. And we're going to say constructor then, right? Here's our constructor. And we're going to take in some values from the constructor. But for now, let's just, it's underlined because we need to call the superclass. And here's the superclass. So remember, just like we did last time, what is it looking for? The superclass needs the path to the button. All right? So. This is how we're going to build it up. We're going to do this. We're going to use concatenation. We're going to say, we know it's this, assets, right? Images. We know that's part of it. We know we're going to add something else. And then we're going to add our ping, .ping, right? We know that's going to be our path, right? By the way, this is all going to change later on. But for now, this is what we need, okay? In the middle, here in the middle, we're going to put what we're going to get from our constructor. Our constructor is going to be the path string. That's what we're going to get. So we're going to get something called a path string, which is going to be of type string. So path string, which is going to be of type string. Okay, we don't have that yet. We're going to ask for it. And then we're going to use our path string here. And we can call our image path or whatever you want to call it, our path string. But right now, we're making up this path string. Look, assets, images, and ping. We're going to put this together so that I never have to put assets, images, or the ping extension in again. That means that all of our buttons have to be ping images. Right now, in this particular class that we're making, we're limiting it, right? And they're all in the images folder and the assets folder. And whenever we call upon this button class, it's got to be, because look at the path. It's a relative path to the core of my folders. If I move this somewhere else, it's going to fail. It won't find the path anymore. That's why it's bad to do this way, right? We're going to correct all this, but for now, we need some kind of button class so we can go do the start button, next button, back button example, and then go back and fix this later another day. All right? So don't worry, don't fret. This is the one thing we need to do. Okay, so we call upon this, and once we send this to the path, it has our image. And you know what? For our width and height, we're going to set them up. So here we're going to say something like this. These are our privates. We don't want to use these anywhere else. We're going to say private instance variables. And we're going to declare, even though there is a width and a height, we're going to override them by declaring a width and a height. So we're going to say our width then is of type integer, or number, sorry, we're going to say it's a number. And our height is a number, right? And we're going to kind of instantiate or initialize our width and height. So our width then, because all of our width, so this dot width, watch me here, is equal to 75, right? Actually 150 is what it is. Let's put 100, that's the real width, 150. And this dot height, right, is equal to 50, okay? That's our width and height for our buttons. All of our buttons are going to be 150 and 50. Again, which is not really nice to make a class like this, right? I could put in there some values for width and height. The other thing I want to do is say, I want to also listen for X and Y numbers. So I might as well put those in there too. So I'm going to say X is a number, and Y, just like we did for our label, is a number, right? And now what we want to say is this dot X, because we already have an X value, is equal to X, and this dot Y is equal to Y. All we're doing is initializing, right? And width and height, we've got all that stuff in there. And we're going to also say that our this dot regex then is equal to, right, this dot width times 0.5, and this dot reg_y is equal to this dot height, which we know times 0.5. We're just making a calculation one time. So we're going to replace these values later on. Okay, like I said, this is going to be called this dot get bounds width, and so on. Right? We're not going to do it right now. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll be okay. Thank you for that. All right, and now once we've done this, we've kind of set this stuff up. We're not going to add it to the stage because we want to add it to the stage outside of this class. All right. So all we're doing is we're taking the button and adding it in. Now we do need a couple of other things. I want to add in my event listeners, because why wouldn't I have my event listeners in here? Let's put those in. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to have two event listeners. They're both going to be private kind of methods, if you will. Here's my private methods. One of them, let's just copy and paste here, right, is going to be called one of them is going to be this, the other one's going to be that for my mouse over and out. But the click events will have to be outside because my click events will do different things. Okay, so I can't include them in the buttons. It's too complex for our little example. All right, so I'm going to call them here, but they can't be called start button, right? Because start button is not going to have a context. We're going to have this dot on, right? So this dot on mouse over, right? Because this thing that I'm building is a bitmap. It has an is-a relationship, right? So this dot on mouse over, and it can't be over start button because that's a global class that I've included. It's got to be something like I've got to have an over button, which I don't have. This dot over button, and this dot out button. So this dot, I don't have these yet. I have to code these, right? This dot over and out. See, I don't have that yet. Make sense? Okay, so those I have to start coding this. This is the stuff I need. Let me go back out to this piece, right? This is out in my game.ts file. I need this code here just to duplicate this code and make these my private functions. And I'm going to rename everything how it should be according to my conventions, right? So there I am. I've got my function, but remember, I don't have to include the keyword function when I do a class in TypeScript. I just have to do the name of the method. Mess up? Nope, I didn't mess up. I just have to get a little bit more space here. This is going to be a little bit more space. And this is going to be just tabbed in a little bit because it's just tabbed out. So it's going to be the over button. That's my over button. That's what it's going to be called. And this is going to be my out button. I'll bring it up for a second so you can see it. Now, I haven't coded it yet, but now I can't access startButton.alpha, right? I can't do that because it's not going to be the start button. It's going to be any button that I assign this thing to, any object that I assign this thing to. So how do I do that? I got to do something like this. I'm going to just type it here. I'm going to say event.currentTarget.alpha then. So it's going to be is equal to 0.7. That's what it's going to be. So whatever the current target of the event is going to be, change the alpha to 0.7. And then that same pattern, instead of retyping, I'm just going to take this here and put this here. Now, I know, the reason why I know this is because this is how mouse events work on the DOM, right? So it's probably going to work for us here in CreateJS, right? So we have our event.currentTargetAlpha is 0.7 and then and stuff like this. So this is our new button class that we made, right? But in order for this to work, what are the other two steps, guys? Remember, there was 3 steps to making sure that we add this new class, this new module into our code. What are the 3 steps? Do you guys remember? Yes, but the first thing is we first do this. This is the first step. Create the button class in its own TypeScript file, number 1. Second step, we have to go to my Solution Explorer, right? And we have to go to my index.html. Remember, the index.html binds all the buttons together, all the classes and everything together, right? So that's the second thing we need to do, right? Just give me a second, guys. Just got to respond to one thing, and then I'll show you one in a second. So how do we do that? So I'm going to unpin this one. Here's my index.html, and if you notice down here, I have the label, right? Well, I got to do the same thing. Instead of my scripts objects label, I've got to do scripts objects button.js, right? And of course, I'm going to drag and drop because I'm a lazy guy, right? Actually, I just want to avoid problems. So here, I'm going to put it underneath here. This is where it's going to go. And I'm going to take my button.ts file and drag and drop it into here. Okay, and it's going to go here. So that's the second step. Second step is add your new class into your index.html because your index.html is the central document. Hallelujah. And it binds everything together. If you don't have that, then what happens is you haven't bound you can make a class whatever you like. It's not going to be part of our class, okay? Okay, that's the second thing. Third thing, now that I've got this, I got to make a reference path, like you said, right? And that's going to happen way at the top of my file. Now, you might have said, hey, this isn't a type definition. Do I need to make a reference path? The answer is absolutely yes. Include this, and you'll never have problems with your reference path. If you don't, you might get a JavaScript error later on down the road. All right. So let me show you this. So I'm going to go Solutions, Solution Explorer here. I'm going to take this button, and again, I got to make sure that it's underneath or above label and up below all this other stuff. Right? Because this is my new class here. Let's see if I can do this without. No, I killed it. I killed it. Right? Well, it's just not working. I'm going to make another one like this, and just call it button.ts. I'm just going to tan bomb it. Okay, so it's going to be called button. It should, if you, it's my resolution. Right? So it's button. I drag and drop button.ts. Okay, so now that I've got a reference path, then, right, when I go up here, instead of my start button being a CreateJS bitmap, I can change it, right? Let's see if it works. So I'm going to go, it should come up, objects then, dot button. There it is. It appears as part of my code hinting for JavaScript. It comes up, right? So I'm giving myself code hinting, and now it'll come up as part of my class. That's the first thing I need to do. All right, so I changed my start button into an object stop button. And the second thing is, I got to mess all this up because this is all wrong, right? Because my start button isn't of type CreateJS bitmap anymore. It's of type objects.button. Objects.button. There we go. And this is good, but this path is incorrect. And I'm also looking for X and Y coordinates, right? Because I've changed my button. So I need this to be gone, right? Because I don't need this path anymore because that's how I've coded my new class, right? And I need X and Y coordinates, which are the ones I've already recorded, which are 320 and 340, right? So that's going to take care of that problem, which means I don't need any of this, and I don't need any of this. That's how we kind of, make our button class a little bit nicer. And now we have, this is my start button. I got to instantiate. This is my start button, and this is my hello label. I'm going to make it just different. Hello label. So we've added some comments here so you see what it is. Separation basically is what it is. And I don't need my over button and over start button and over out start button because those are being handled by my class. All I need is my click start button because I can't have my my click start button as part of my class because every click event handler is going to be slightly different. They're going to do different things, right? So I can't include it in my class. It's too tough for now. I can, but it requires a lot more work than what I have. So it's easier this way. Okay, cool. So now I've got my stuff. If I haven't changed anything really, all I've done is rejig my class so this works. So if I've done everything correctly, and if I haven't messed up, and I might have, I'll run it and it'll run the exact same way. Let's check this out. So I'm going to run it, compile everything. It's going to build. And then if everything goes well, if I refresh, my button should come back, and it does not. So something somewhere I've done wrong. Let's check out we're going to right click here and go inspect element, and we're going to go to console, and it's going to tell us what the problem is. It says failed to load resource from the server, localhost assets images. Oh, see, I forgot a backslash. That's what it is. It's a stupid thing. So now I'm going to fix that in my class. I told you there's a mistyping. So I'm going to go back to my button class, and of course somewhere up here, yeah, here it is. Images should have a /. Right? Because I forgot that. All right, let's try that again. I'm going to refresh. And if I refresh properly, theoretically, now it should show up. Right there it is, my start button. Now let's make sure that the hover class works. So if I go hover, it hovers. So that'll hover any start button, any button that I've kind of put in there. And now when I click onto it, it'll still do the click class, right? So now I've created a simple UI element, right, button, right? And I'm going to definitely update GitHub so you have this code, right? And now we've got our buttons, and we can add the buttons into our new state machine, okay? Whew, a little bit of work. But then afterwards, we got our button. Now we have some UI elements. We have a label and a button. We can play with these labels and buttons. Guys, all you need is labels and buttons and images, and you've got your assignment number 1, really, at the end of the day. But now we've got to create the state machine in order for us to shift from one screen to the next screen. How do we do that? All right, so we don't need our button class anymore. That's one thing we don't need. We do need a state. We need different states, and we also need a couple of configuration methods that we include from the get-go. Okay, so there's a couple of other modules I need to create here to prepare myself. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop debugging. I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer, pin this, and then I'm going to go to my Team Explorer here, and I'm going to go Home. I'm going to go Changes, right? And I'll make sure that there's no untracked files. I'm going to click Add All in Visual Studio, and up here I'm going to say Added Button Class. And I'm going to click Commit. I'm going to go Home, and I'm going to go Unsync Commits and Sync. And when I do that, now you have your button class up online. So if you go to COMP397 under Centennial College, COMP397, Lesson 3, you'll see this, all the stuff I've done so far. So it's all up there for you. So you don't have to, if you don't have my code, now you have it. Okay, cool. So we've gone this far. I need to create my state machine, but I need a couple of extra files. So I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer. And I have my objects library, right? My objects, I've got two objects, my button and my label now, right? I need another file that I'm going to use. I need a configuration file that I'm going to kind of put in some information, some constants that I'm going to use all the time, right? Like, for example, my width and height and all this other stuff that I put in. Like, for example, 320 and 240. These are hard-coded values, which is like, you know, bad form, Batman, right? We don't want to put that in there. So we want to kind of create some constants. Let's do that. So I'm going to go to my scripts file now, and we're going to go right-click. I'm going to add a new folder, right? And the new folder is going to be called config. My config folder, right? In my config, I'm going to make my config module, right? It's going to be config. That's what my module is going to be called. But I got to be careful. In my config module, right? I may have different classes or objects, right? Now I don't have to do that. Remember, modules don't always have to be containing classes. They can also contain static objects like constants, functions, all kinds of them. Remember, JavaScript is very flexible. It's not like C# where I have to encapsulate everything in a class. I just have to encapsulate everything in a self-executing closure, right? Which is what the module is. So let's think about that. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add, right? I'm going to go a new TypeScript file that I'm going to call config. Right? So it's config, right? It's going to be a little bit confusing in a second. But now let's call this thing module, my config module. With my config module. In my config module, I have all my bloody constants, which I need, right? All of them, right? So let's start typing some of them that I need. Some of them that I'm going to need in my config module is my my states for my state machine. Let's do these ones. So we're going to say we're going to call them state constants. Follow me here, right? And let's start naming them. Export. We're going to use the export keyword var, and we're going to say menu state. My menu state or start state, if you will, and is of type number, right? Because that's what it is equal to 0. It's like an enumeration. In fact, I could do an enumeration here, but let's just not for now. Export var play state, right? Here's my play state, not menu start, menu state. Sorry, guys. Tired. My play state is number. We're going to do 3 states, right? We don't have a lot of time. Is 1, and export var, you know, kind of a game over state. We'll call it overstate, right? Is number is equal to 2. Okay, what does this mean? Well, remember, it's just like an enumeration, but I'm making them so that these constants, menu state, play state, and overstate, are part of my config. Let's see how this works. Now, remember, it's a module, so I'm going to treat it like another module. So this is the first step. What's the second step? Add it to my HTML. If I don't do that, I can't have it. It's not available to me. So I need to go into my underneath my, and I probably want to put it before my label and button, right? And maybe, you know what? If I go back up, maybe it should even be, because this is a config file, it should even be before my JavaScript or my stats or anything else. It should be way up here. It should be one of the first files I add in here, like way up here, right? Because I don't have it yet, but I'm probably going to need it. Right, so there it is. There's my first thing. So it can be the first thing that I load in. That's okay. The reason for that is because it provides constants for me, right? And it's a little bit less I don't have to put in some hard-coded values. I can go to my config file and change my constants, and they're changed everywhere in my code, as opposed to I have to go through my code and change it in each file. That's bad, right? Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, what do I do now? I just talked about this. If I'm going to go, I need the second step to add my module in. References, right? So now, this is bad, right? So it always happens to me. I'm going to kind of bear with me while I zoom way out, guys, so I don't have any kind of, I want to do this. That'll work now, right? And I want to kind of put it at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of skip down a couple of steps here. And when I drag and drop my config file, it's going to go right at the top. Let's see if it can work. Yay! That didn't mess up now, huh? So now that I've got my config file way at the top, right? I'm going to unpin this. I'm going to save everything. That's the most important thing. Save it all. And now that I've got my config, I should be able to do something like this. I should be able to say something like, if I was going to kind of access it, I should just try it. Let's say, so it's config dot, and then you see I have menu state, overstate, and play state. They come up because now it's part of my module, right? It's not a class. It's just a static constant that I've kind of have sitting inside of a file that I'm going to access. And all they equate to is 0, 1, or 2. But they're human readable constants that make sense to us. If it's 0, actually menu state is actually equal to 0. Just a number. Who cares what it is? So the enumeration is what I'm trying to do. Later on, we'll change this to an enumeration. Okay, that's the first step. Now, that's the second step is actually creating a couple of things here. One is we need to kind of create our main function, which is main down here, right? We need to change this main function in here. And we're going to make this into our next, we're going to make another function. We're going to kind of get rid of the main function eventually, which we're going to call our change state function. So we're going to say function, new function called change state, right? That's what it's going to be. And we're going to do a couple things here. I need to instantiate the state, right? We're going to do that in a second. But for now, it's going to return void, this thing here. So our change state function. Okay. I'm going to bring it up so you guys can see this. So we're going to make a new function. So this is our this is our main, if you will, this is going to be our state machine. Okay, so here's our change state function. And our change state function is to do a couple things, right? We're going to launch various scenes, right? We need a switch statement, right? Here's a switch statement. And what we need to switch something in order for us to check something in order for us to change our states, right? And the way to do that, of course, is to create a global state variable, something that we're going to be able to, you know, kind of go over, and we can use this global state variable, if you will, our current state, if you will, that we're going to move from one state to the other. Okay, so we don't have a state variable right now, but we want to be able to. That's what's going to go on the switch statement. It's got to look for. We're going to look at we're going to inspect our variable, our state variable, and say whatever the state is, right? Our current state, if you will. That current state of our variable is the one we're going to switch. So let's put in there, you know, our state. We'll call it state right now. We don't have it right now, but we're going to put it in. Okay. So in the top of our code, then, right, as one of our global framework variables, right? That's not really what it is. It's not a stage or canvas or whatever, but it makes sense that this is the closest one. It's not going to be a label. It's going to be a control variable, if you will. So we're going to call this state. And it's of type number. It's not a state. It's a type number right now. We don't know what it is, right? Number. Okay, cool. So we have that. We have our state, which is a number, and in here, when we receive our state, whatever it is, right? For now, we want to do one of these. We want to say case. You know how switch statements work. State config dot menu state, right? If it's the menu state, right? Then let's write it in human readable code. Instantiate the menu screen, right? Or show, we'll say show, it's better. Show the menu scene, right? Break. And then case If it's something else, we're gonna reformat this in a second. Config.playstate. If it's the play state, then show the play scene, right? And break. Break means we break out of that, just like a regular switch statement. And then case, if it's config.the overstate, the game over state, then show the game over scene. That's what this is going to do, and we're going to break. Make sense? So that's the first thing. So we're going to call these other states. That's the pseudocode of what we're going to do. We're not anywhere near that yet, right? But this is what I want to do. I want to say check the state, whatever it is, right? What is it? And that state is going to change according to what my choices are. And we're going to start off with a certain state. What state are we going to start off with? The menu state. That's the first state, right? So I'm going to set it somewhere. I'm going to say state then. So here in our, after we set up our stats, but before we jump into our menu, right? Before we get there, I'm going to do one of these. I'm going to say our state, right, is equal to config.menustate. It's equal to that. Right? So we're going to kind of set the value, the variable, the value of the variable in our initialization function. That's going to be our first state, if you will. Okay. You notice that we're calling main, but we can't call main in here. We can't have our main function do this, right? That can't be. Our main function can't do any of this stuff. In fact, it can't add it to stage because stage is the global stage, right? So one of the things we need to do to prepare this is we need to create another container that we add everything to, right, as an example, and then we add that container to the stage. And that's the right thing to do, right? So that's what we need to do there. How do we take care of that? Well, we need to create something called the game container, right? And this is something of a game object, again, way up here, right? So we're going to create another object called game, right? And again, you can call this, instead of game, you can call it scene. That might be the better way to say it. Our scene then is of type CreateJS.container, right? That's better. Now, a container in CreateJS is literally a box that other objects can be put in, can be added to. You can actually do whatever the container name is, .addChild. All right, just like we do for the stage. So when we do an add child, we actually take that and it adds into the display list. Think about a container as a mini stage. You can put a stage within a stage, right? So a container can have all the values, and it has a local coordinate space. All right, there's the global coordinate space of the world, and there's the local coordinate space of the game container. The container itself is a box, all right? Okay, cool, so this is our scene. This is where we become a little funky. Without changing anything yet, we're gonna go into our main, here's our main menu, and we're gonna do one of these. Okay, we're gonna say this. First, we've declared it, but before we start everything off, we're gonna do one of these. We're gonna say scene is equal to a new CreateJS.container. We need to instantiate that class, all right? So we have the object now, all right? And then instead of stage.addChild, we're going to say scene. That makes more sense. Scene.addChild. We made our own scene class, right? Scene.addChild, right? And down at the bottom, we're going to say stage.addChild scene, right? Is that confusing to you? Again, we've made a container that's going to contain all of our objects. And that container, the whole container, is going to be added to the stage. So what can I do? I can take that container, right? Think about what I'm doing. I can take that container, wipe it out, and redo it with something else, right? It's much easier than getting rid of all my stuff, right? I can remove my container from the stage every time, or reset my container and say, you know, my container, remove all children, or stage, remove all, I'll wipe my stage and put it back. I'd rather do that, right? Because when you add children, you can remove children from the display list. I'm adding things to the array list, that's what it really is, and then I'm popping them off the array list. Adding them in, popping them off, and how I do that is with different commands. Okay, we're running out of time, so we're not going to get it all done, but we're preparing for this, right? So again, scene, we got our scenes, and if without any changes, this isn't going to do anything right now. This is just our preparation for our state machine, right? We'll even call it state machine prep, right? We haven't got there yet. What I want to do with this piece, this area here, is I want to test it to see that this is working the exact same way, because we've made a bunch of changes. And when I start reformatting my code, guys and girl, right, the last thing I want to frickin' do, right, is do my changes, and then it doesn't work. It breaks. If I do too many changes, right, I have to, especially with JavaScript, which is a little bit more unstructured, even with TypeScript, I have to go back. There's too many things. I've done too many things here. So now let's test it the way it is, right? That's the next step. Let's build it the way it was. So to make sure that still there's functionality the way we had it. Okay, and I'm just going to refresh here to make sure. And so far now, this stuff here is in an invisible game container called a scene, all right? And it takes up the exact same space. It fills up whatever we have into it. So if we put a bunch of stuff in the scene, it'll expand to fit my object, right? So it's not going to shrink. It shrink wrap everything that's inside my scene. So if I add a container, my container is going to be massive. It's going to be as big as you want it to be, right? It'll actually fill up the entire stage. That's what it'll do first. If you want to make my container smaller, you can use a clipping mask to do that. But for now, without doing some kind of clipping mask, our container is big, okay? All right, so this stuff here still works. I still click it and it says click. All that stuff is good. I'm in good shape. I'm in good shape here for me to make my next change. All right, so what do I do next? I know that this scene is what I want to have in here in my main function, right? That's what I want to have in there, right? Okay. And you know what? Here's something I want to think about as well, right? This scene that I'm adding to stage, I'm adding my scene to the stage, right? I want to do this every time. Think about this. If I do the same code, if I say scene, I'm not going to rename the scene. It's going to be the same scene across all of my scenes, right? So my scene there, or if you want to call this current scene, if you will, right? If I use the new keyword, what does it do? It wipes it out, man. It kills it. That's what it does, right? So instead of me having to reinstantiate everything, right, or whatever, it's just going to wipe out the scene, okay? So then I can take this main class, all right, this main scene then, and use it as my menu state, okay? My menu state only has one thing. It has a button that says start. That's all it has right now. Okay, let's make it. And we'll pause here because we're running out of time. But if you go to my solution, I need another folder inside my scripts folder as we're building out our folder structure. I'm going to right-click on my scripts. I'm going to add another folder. Here's my new folder called states. And inside my states folder, guess what it's going to be? I'm going to add a new TypeScript file called menu. Right? In my menu state, here's my menu state. I'm going to put some documentation here or comments. This is my menu state. I haven't really made it yet, but it's going to be a module that's going to be called states, my states module, right? And in my states module, I'm going to call my my menu state, right? Well, here's the thing. I can do it two ways. I can make it so it's a class, or I can call a function. Well, I already have the function, man. Right? My function is called main. And I'm going to just grab this bloody thing right here. Here's my main function. Grab this whole thing. I'll copy it. I'm going to go back into my menu state and paste it. And the only thing I need to do different here is do an export. Now I'm exporting my main function, right? And it's going to be in my state, right? I can't call it main because that's just too, it doesn't make any sense to call it main. We need to call this menu, right? So states.menu is going to call this function. That's what we're going to do. All right, so now let's look at the JavaScript we're making, right? So you see what the JavaScript is. It's just a function that's inside of a self-executing anonymous closure, right? That's all it is, right? Or sorry, the right way to say it is anonymous self-executing closure, right? So that's what it is, just a menu state. So then going back to my, that's the first part. What's the next part when we add a module? Add it into our index.html. That's short form, right? So I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer really quickly. Sorry, bear with me, guys, for a few more minutes before we run away so I can show you this piece. And I know that I'm going to add this in under my, my buttons and everything else, and before my core game script. It's got to be over here, right? So because it has to be available to my game, it has to come in here, right? So I'm going to drag and drop my menu state then inside here, right? Below my objects, all my objects I'm going to create, and above my core game script, right? That's where it's got to go. And then in my game.ts file, I got to make sure that this is really small too so that it doesn't mess up. When my references, I got to do the same thing. It's got to be below my objects, right? So I'm going to kind of make some space in here and drag and drop my menu, right? There it is. Right? So that's my menu state. That's my first state. So I have access now to my menu state, but I need another variable. I'm going to save all. I need another variable called state function. Now this is this. Now this. You know when I say this. Guys, this is the key. This is the craziness. If my state function, right, is a function, right? What type of variable is it? Can I really name it as a type? This is where the flexibility of TypeScript and JavaScript it comes into play. It's definitely some kind of higher end variable. It's some kind of control variable. So it's not like state, which is a number. It's not like scene, which is a container. It's a current state function, or state function, if I will. I'm going to call it state function, right? And it's of type any, which is kind of giving the finger, you know, flipping the bird to TypeScript for a second, right? It means it's a it's any type of variable. We don't know what kind of variable. It's a function, right? And it's if anything, we're creating an alias. It's going to be an alias for our a current function. That's what it is. Our current state. That's what it is. We don't know what it is yet, but our current state is going to change depending on what we choose in our buttons, right? Okay, because we've copied this piece. Because we've copied the main menu already, my main, which is right here. Do I need my main anymore? No, I can get rid of it. So this is gone. Okay, but I need a way to say that my current function, right, is my main function. That's what I need to do, right? So how do I do that? Well, I got to do it here in my menu state. So in my menu state, I'm going to say this: current function, or current state. Let's see if I can do this. Or state function. What did I call it? State function. Arg. Did I type it wrong? Yeah. State function. By the way, see how this is giving an error because there is no main, right? So I got to get rid of that too. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say current, or state function, right? State function then is equal to, right? Here it is, states dot menu, right? That's my current function. All I'm doing is making an alias. I'm pointing to the other function with this just an alias, a thing, right? State function is equal to states menu. And when I do that, what do I want to do? I want to call the states menu from in here. All right, that's what I want to do. So how am I going to call that? It's going to be called, my state function has to be called from somewhere, right? Where is it going to be called from? I could do that here. I could go down here and call state function like this. That's what I'm going to call, right? I'm going to call my state function down here. I could do that, right? But somewhere I need to call my change state somewhere, and I'm calling it. My state is equal to my config state, my config menu state, right? And what I'm doing is when my state changes, I call, right, my config state function. That's what I'm going to do, my change state function, right? Here's my change state function, right? That's what's going to call it's going to change my state, right? And I got to call that at least one time, which is going to be right here. So change state. right? So this is my init. Now let's see if it runs. This should just run the way it normally runs, right? It should run without anything else. It should run when I call this thing, if I've done everything correctly. Let's run this thing and check it out. Push it up to GitHub for you guys. All right. So it worked, right? Because if it wouldn't work, then you wouldn't see this, right? Let's inspect the code to make sure it's right. So I'm going to go right-click, inspect element, right? And now, if you notice, I want to make sure that we're getting the right code. Look, here's this is what we actually have in my index.html. My states is right here. My states method is right here. If it's there, I know that I'm calling that method. I know that I'm calling the states function. This is the first piece of my state machine, right? What am I going to do? When I click on my button, what am I going to do? I'm going to call my next state. And what's going to happen is this state's going to collapse, and my new state's going to come into being. And that's how we're going to go from one state to the other. We're going to continue that next week. Okay? I'm going to up this to GitHub. And we're going to stop debugging here for us to do that. I'm going to go to Team Explorer, Home, Changes, and I'll make sure that I have all my untracked files in there. I'm going to say added first state for state machine. Hit commit, home, unsync commits, and sync. And that's going to push everything up to GitHub, and you're good to go. Okay, so guys, that's the first piece. I know it's a lot, but see if you can, by next week, I know we meet on Fridays, and your assignment 1 is due Friday. But take that same example now. Think of what I can do. Can you complete the next pieces for yourself, right? Can you take the next pieces, the next menu, and what I want you to think about is one thing that when you click the button, there's 2 things that have to happen when you click that button, that start button. It's got when you go into the play state. There's 2 things that have to happen. You have to wipe away the container, the current container that has which is the scene container. You have to unload the scene container from the scene by doing something like this: stage.remove all children. That's the first thing you need to do. And then you need to call the new state into being. When you call the new state, it's going to be a copy of this state. That's all it's going to be, with different stuff. Okay? That's all it's going to be. And when you're going to have other buttons that take you back and forward and instantiate those new scenes over and over again by replacing the scene container with something else. Okay, that's all it's going to be.
Did you add a function variable in there as well?
I mean a function variable.
So let's say there's a number. Let's say got the code. So let's say the states.menu have, let's say, a number in it.
Config.menu state, yeah. Remember, I did that. I added it. You missed that piece. I added a config module that has that in there, right there.
Yeah. What if you want to put that number with that any state function in the main file?
I could. There's different ways of doing this. You're right. I see what you're thinking. You can do a lot of different ways of doing this. Okay. But this is I'm trying to keep it easy. Right? You can also make this an enum. There's many things you can do to do the same thing. Okay. All right, and that's it for me for today.